so today we're looking at Future Garage. If your inception into this genre was just Burial's Untrue, then I would strongly recommend checking out artists like Sorrow and Vacant. There's a whole bunch of great playlists on Spotify. I'll leave it in the description below. It's kind of an underground genre, but it's still very much alive. Let's jump into it. Okay, so where do we start with this project? Let's look at the drums real quick. So we're starting off with a drum group. Everything inside our drum group has drum bus on it at 14% with the medium distortion type, and then EQ8 just to round off that sound a little bit of limiting, minus 1.18 on the gain there. And then my ceiling height is way down. Truth be told, I don't think I need this anymore. I think it was in the early stages of making the track when maybe a couple of the levels were peaking. Inside that group, I've got the kick snare, a couple of hats, and some rim shots. Let's start with the kick. The kick is a sample I found, and I've just shortened that sample way down so it's a little bit more clicky. And I'm just EQing that sample, rolling off loads of lows and especially these muddy frequencies here. Just a little boost in the 800 Hertz region and then kind of rounding it off towards 5K Hertz. Over on the snare track, we've actually got 3 samples. We've got the UKG rim shot. We've got a little DS snare. That's got some Valhalla on it. We'll come to that in a sec. And then we've got a clap. Cool, so over in Chains, I've added the Valhalla reverb. To do this, all you want to do is just create a send and return track and then drop your reverb track into where it says drop audio effects here. This allows me to add some sounds to that track stack, but not all of the sounds together. It's really quite handy. I'm sending 2 of my instruments here, as you can see by send A volume to that Valhalla reverb, but not that first little rim shot sound. My rim shot is panned a little bit to the left with my main clap sound, completely central, and then my little clap sound a little bit to the right. Just kind of helps separate these sounds just a little bit. I've then got utility, a limiter, and I'm rolling off the lows with the EQ8. Nothing too fancy. Now, all of my drum sounds, I should mention, have the same amount of groove added to them. This started with the hi-hat. Let me show you this. I think this is a trick that I picked up from Julian Earl a few years back, so don't come for me in the comments. Don't forget, this channel is called Inspired By. I'm taking inspiration from everywhere and passing it on to you guys when I learn of it. What we've got here is a hi-hat that didn't initially sound like this. Over here on the left hand side you can see groove, and it was originally set to none. We did kind of have a dynamic rhythm with a higher volume on the downbeats and a lower volume on the offbeats, and that just sounded like this. Very straight, not necessarily boring, but very quantized. So what I did was come over to the left hand side. I often forget that grooves are here, and I just went for Logic 16, and you get all of these different grooves here. So what you can do is hit the headphones and kind of preview those patterns as you go down the list. Once you've got one that you like, you can drag it into clip and it will populate that groove box. Now what you can do in any MIDI drum rack is just choose groove and then that pattern there. So I'm doing that with every single MIDI drum pattern. So if we go into the snares, it also has that groove. The kicks also has that. So that's how you're going to get that kind of UKG Future Garage swing feel throughout, even though everything's pretty quantized. Processing on the hat. I'm taking that hat from a really loud transient to something that's a little bit more subtle. I don't use this technique too often, but it's a great way to dial in some dynamic and more of a subtle vibe from your hi-hats. I've got a little bit of a flanger going on. Creates a really nice bit of movement that we hear a lot in Future Garage. And then I'm constricting the EQ8 with kind of a harsh telephone EQ in the kind of higher regions. A line delay just to add a little bit of width with my hi-hats. We're going to have the kicks, rims, and a lot of other elements be mono. So this is something that can just afford being a little bit wider in the mix. I've then got a different hi-hat pattern here, playing just these kind of offbeat swung notes. It's the same hi-hat pattern just pitched around, and this is our hi-hat closed 808. We're not using the same trick on this. We want that really harsh transient, but a different kind of EQ8 constriction and then a mono utility because we want to be able to hear that second hi-hat over the first. I wanted to add some extra percussion with these rim shots. So we've got rim shot 1, 2, and 3. And I'm just really constricting those sounds with the auto filter. Keeps them a little bit more in keeping. I've increased the LFO amount and rate, which is making the sound feel like it's opening up. Let me show you that pattern. Have a listen out for that sound. Let's give you a recap of those significant drum sounds. Now from here is the bit that I really enjoy, creating some foley around those drum sounds. This isn't featured in every future garage track, but in some of my favorite tracks, it definitely enhances that percussive sound. What I hear a lot is these kind of sword scrapey sounds. You can hear there's reverb added to this track. If you're a fan of Burial and other artists that take inspiration from him, you'll often hear the bullet case sounds drop into the floor or loose change. As I said, just some Valhalla reverb there, and then kind of a wide telephone EQ. And we're doing something similar with every other rimshot sound, and that's applying these crunchy kind of paper sounds. A line delay to make this wide. So we've got something that's kind of being panned or essential, and then we've got a wider sound as well. It's kind of enhances the listening experience. Let's apply that with the rimshots. Kind of make sure that every other snare is fairly unique. After this, I've got two tambourines. Now the first tambourine you can see is being automated, our first bit of automation today. So this is just a quick sample that I've taken from a much longer sample on Splice, and I've just chopped 2 beats worth out of the tambourine. I wanted to make sure the dynamic eased in and eased out, but I didn't want it to just be a simple fade in, fade out of volume. So we're using the filter to fade in and fade out that sound. It allows it to be this kind of ghostly pattern that comes in and enhances the drum beat. And then every now and then we just have a really reverberous tambourine as well. Back in the day, I used to love making beats like this. I kind of wish that I was still putting out music like this, but if I was going to, I'd definitely use DistroKid, which is today's sponsor. When your track finally makes it to stores, you want to ensure that your audience can see it. You don't want to just post a link that they're going to swipe by. That's why I use promo cards. They're constantly updating the designs and it really makes your track pop. I always use these on the day of release. If you want to join me on DistroKid, make sure that you use the link in the description below because you'll get 7% off your first year. Let's get back to the video. All right, so the final part is looking at the melodic elements. We want to start off with a respace. I just made this in Operator. What you want to do is take like a couple of saw wave shapes and just detune them a little bit. I got the fine tune of the second oscillator set to 20%. That's going to give it that kind of lo-fi pitch wobble sound, but I'm also using the LFO rate to increase that and exaggerate it a little bit. I'm rolling off the sound from a really bright place to something that's a little bit darker. Then I'm going over to chorus ensemble and giving it a little bit of a wider sound, and then really boosting the gain of that sound and giving it some harmonic saturation with the saturator. You kind of want this shape to sound like it's being LFO'd or ducked a little bit, so I'm using the auto pan, but instead of keeping the phase where it is, just turn it all the way to the right or left. So now it's not panning from left to right, it's just being ducked in and out. Now I was struggling to pull this sound out of small speakers a little bit, so I used my old friend Waves R-Bass. Just choose a preset, it's going to be way more audible for your audience. And then I've got the sidechain compressor linked to the kick, so that's being ducked every time the kick drum plays, almost all the way out. Something that I forgot to mention is you want to make sure that on time you're setting the voices to 1. That's going to make sure that the sound is kind of mono and only playing one sound at a time. And then when you go up to pitch, just set glide on and change it between sort of 150, 200 milliseconds. Do it to taste so that when you get that second note there and that they overlap, you get that lovely little bend. Okay, let's move on to the granulator. Not really something that I've featured on the channel before. To get Granulator 2, all you have to do is go to the Ableton website. It should be free if you've got Ableton Live 11 Suite, and just download Granulator 2. You might have seen my Burial video where I used the sampler to create like a granulated atmospheric pad. It can be done, but it's very long-winded. With Granulator 2, that legwork is done for you. So I just dropped in a vocal pad sound. And you can see that it's selecting the sound from here, but kind of spraying it outwards and choosing sounds from before and after. That's chosen with spray, and the grain amount lets you select how much of that sample you want to be played through. I'm automating the file position because what I like to do is just choose different parts of the sample. Now you can probably see down here that I'm also automating the gain of node 2 here and node 8. And that's just to bring out a little bit of life when we hear this second lower sample. It wasn't really enough to add volume automation here because I was kind of ducking and constricting that mix a little bit. So just something to open up the sample and then set it right back to the beginning again when we get to the higher sample. Now don't go anywhere because I'm going to come back to the vocal. I feel like it's the staple part of a future garage track. But finally, something that I noticed in some of Sorrow's track was just this acoustic guitar sample. So I wanted to try it for myself. I've got this nylon guitar sample which is quite long. Now, as you can tell, I've double clicked that and I've just pitched it up 5 semitones. So it's a little bit more in key with the music that I have. And the way that I'm processing it is just rolling off some of those low and muddy regions of the track and really boosting the highs. I got some sidechain compression going on. And then I've got a little bit of reverb, 1.47 seconds of decay, and a fairly low dry wet mix at 35%. And then OTT to really carry out kind of the mids of the instrument. The thing that I really liked about chopping up this sample is that fret noise that I'm also kind of building into my percussion. You can hear it here. Kind of drifts off until the next sample appears, and just quickly in this space here. It combines with my other instruments really, really nicely. It's something that the listener wouldn't necessarily notice at the beginning of the track, but you could strip the track way back and just have these 3 elements later on. And then they're going to appreciate it a little bit more in the latter half of the track and definitely on the second listen. All right, so the vocals are really surgical in the future garage tracks. They're pretty much carrying the vibe of the entire track. What I would suggest is try and find vocals from an a cappella or the same or similar sample pack. That's the option that I went for. I went to Splice and found this FS3 sample pack and just chose different kind of oohs and ahs from that sample pack and then pitched them up accordingly. Now, what you can see here in this highlighted region is my kind of DIY way of creating a delay. Sometimes I don't always want to send my delay to a return or have it on a new track. So what I'll do is just crop the amount of the sample that I want to play and then just turn it down by hand over time. Let me show you how these samples sounded with no processing. So not too bad, but you want them to stand out and you want them to sound a little bit more ghostly. This is a very burial kind of sound. So the first thing that I'm doing is constricting that EQ and then adding erosion. Kind of getting a little bit more bit crushing going on. You can move this XY pad around and you're going to get more or less bit crushing. Of course, you can automate that as well, which sounds really tasteful at times. Add in quite a long reverb, and in places, I think towards the end, I'm just automating that decay out. I've got some glue compression just to kind of dampen some of the louder dynamics. You can see in places I've got quite a loud sample or quite a quiet sample, so I just want to constrict that dynamic range. And then I'm doing some subtractive EQing at the end, just taking out some of those muddy middle grounds, taking out this harmonic that I didn't like, which was created by the bit crushing. That pretty much wraps it up for our future garage track. How did you enjoy the video and what do you want to see next time? As always, I thank you so much for stopping by and I'll see you in the next video.